Welcome back to my channel. In this episode, we're going to delve into your main character and also share what I did for my character development in my debut novel, Blood of the Lily, and stay tuned for the end for a pit stop. Welcome to episode 5 of my series, How to Write a Fiction Book. My name is Shannon and I write under the pen name SD Houston. In November, I will publish my debut novel, Blood of the Lily. It's a YA fantasy novel which is based on Irish mythologies. And in over just 2 weeks, I'm going to reveal the entire cover here on my channel, so look out for that episode on July 15th. Now, on to the disclaimer. So first, the writing process is truly unique art form for each and every writer. Some things I offer here may not work for every writer or for you, and that's fine. Just use what works for your process. I would love to hear what ideas you have or what works for you in the comments below. And just remember, there's no right or wrong way to the writing process, but I hope to offer something here for you. Writing a whole book can be a daunting process, but if you break it down into steps, it will become maybe just a little less daunting. So it's a bit like having a baby. Whether you're mom or the supporting partner, you'll probably do a bit of research, like how to prepare for the delivery, or what it's like taking care of a newborn, when and how to feed them, how to soothe a crying baby, and most importantly, how to put on a diaper. No, really. So I found this out the hard way when in a pinch I had to leave my infant son with my brother, and he changed his diaper. And when I came back, my son leaked all over me. When I changed his diaper, I saw that it was on backward, and my brother shrugged and he said, "I looked all over the box. There was no instructions." Anyway, so if you go blindly into having a baby, you're going to have a lot of hiccups and wet clothes. But if you prepare ahead of time, you might stay dry. However, it's not a breeze. No one would ever say having a baby would be considered easy, nor is writing a whole book. But both are immensely rewarding, and preparing for them helps to overcome many anxieties. So if you've been following along in my series so far, you have an idea for your fiction book. You've tested it to see if it will sustain a novel-length work, and you've done some research to bring believability to your world by grounding the setting. Now we need to develop your main character. Most fiction writers agree that character development is the key element in a story's creation. And in most pieces of fiction, a close identification with the character is crucial to understanding the entire story. So what does this mean for you exactly? Well, it means that readers expect your characters to move the story and to move within it. They want characters that seem real. They want characters who give them a better understanding of human nature and human behavior. The characters in your fiction are human beings. Essentially, readers want to meet those different human beings who carry them from the first page to the last page. So you need an idea of who will populate your story. And hopefully your research from the previous episode has inspired a beginning list of characters, and maybe you've even identified your main character, who is your protagonist. And by the way, protagonist is the leading character or one of the main characters in a drama, movie, novel, or other fictional texts. So what do you do next after you identified your characters? Well, you need to know the basics about your main character. This is where we will nail down the gender along with his or her name, as well as any supporting characters essential to our main character's development. I plan to go into more detail about developing character in future episodes, but for now, let's nail down 4 key parts. 1, the basics. 2, the relationships. 3, the motivation. And 4, the character arc. Again, for those pantsers out there who don't necessarily like all this pre-planning, I do have alternate methods suggested near the end of this video. All right, so let's start with the basics. Here you need to brainstorm names, physical traits, and personality traits. So let's start with names. You may have already brainstormed some names in your research phase, but now you should choose one. Names should often match the setting for your story unless you have a very specific reason for choosing not to. When a character's name stands out from the society she or he inhabits, it can cause some reader confusion. For example, a bounty hunter in Chuck Wendig's novels that bridged the Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens in the Star Wars canon was named Mercurial Swift, and this immediately springs to mind the question, does the Roman god Mercury exist in the Star Wars universe? So when choosing a name, you could also think about what it stands for. For example, J.K. Rowling, she picked very, very specific names for each character in her novels. Harry Potter's name is a nod to his leadership capabilities, as the name Harry is the Middle English version of the name Henry, which is a name taken from many kings of England. Potter refers to people who make pots, so this could be an indication of Harry's humble origins. Next are physical traits. These are what your character look like, and even if you don't include all the details in your story, or any details, as some writers don't want to include details, they want their readers to be able to envision what the character looks like, you should still know what your character looks like. And these include things like hair, eye, and skin color, body type, clothes, and fashion. And this is not trivial information, as physical traits can lend itself to all types of mannerisms and characterization. Perhaps one physical trait is curly hair, which leads to your character pulling a curl straight over and over. Or maybe your character wears clothes which is caked with grime, smells of fish, or just smelly, and that could be a homeless character. The last part under basics are personality traits. And there are numerous ways to decide on the personality traits you assign to your characters. You can give them an astrological sign or a Chinese animal sign. A couple of good books that I like to include are The Writer's Guide to Character Traits by Dr. Linda Edelstein and Personality Types by Don Richard Riso and Russ Hudson. Now, Edelstein's book was written with writers in mind, but it comes from her years of experience of working with real people in her clinical practice. Riso and Hudson's book map out human personality using the Enneagram. It's an arrangement of 9 personality types. So whether you subscribe to this model or not, the book is useful in assigning personality traits. Let me also add that I often pick out a few things that I think might make my character's personality, but once I decide on her motivation, some of her traits become crystal clear later. And I will cover motivation here in a moment and you'll see what I mean. Well, that was the end of the basics. So let's move on to relationships. Nobody exists in a vacuum. And even if your main character is an orphan, he or she grew up somewhere and came into contact with people or other sentient beings, depending on the story you're creating. So here you're going to want to brainstorm several different relationships: family, friends, co-workers, and associates. And I see associates here as people who offer something to your main character but don't have a big part, like the old man who imparts wisdom. And you might not have all 4 of these, that's fine. Maybe your character is an orphan in a medieval setting, so then she has no family or co-workers because she doesn't have a job yet, but she might have friends and associates. So this leads us next into motivation. And some of the best remembered stories start with having a character people can root for, which is knowing the character's motivation. So like in the movie The First Avenger, it established Steve Rogers' humanity with a sense of righteousness that evolved through the Marvel movies. And this acted to deconstruct the perfect soldier trope, to show us a man struggling with staying true to his own set of morals while facing many great obstacles. And this gave us a reason to root for him. So to find your main character's primary motivation, you need to ask, what does my character want? Even if he doesn't know it. And what does my character need? These can be implicit or explicit, and what your character thinks she needs may be wrong. But you need to know the real answers because that's why your character moves through the story you create. I love establishing an emotional wound from the very beginning of the story, which I learned about from Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi's book, The Emotional Wound Thesaurus. And I highly suggest this book for any would-be or already writer because it's very instrumental to understanding character trauma. The authors have provided some teaser information, some pages from their book on their website, which I will put in the description box below. Okay, back to emotional wounds. This is trauma your character may have experienced before the story happens, like losing a parent at a very young age, or always being skipped over by friends during a basketball game. So by figuring out your character's backstory and establishing this, you can create a complex character whose happiness is hard to find, leaving him feeling very unfulfilled and creating a character we want to root for. So knowing your main character's emotional wound leads to the dark passenger, the lie, as Ackerman and Puglisi say in their book. The worst part of trauma is usually the lie the character believes. It's a misbelief, which is gained through flawed logic. Like losing a parent at a young age could lead your main character into believing that nothing is certain, so why should we worry about the future? So you can see how the character's motivation can influence the personality traits you might want to assign to him or her. And knowing both the emotional wound and the lie can help you develop your character arc, which is the next part. A great character needs to develop, which means having a character arc. Additionally, having a character arc can aid in developing your entire story structure. As your plot unfolds, your character should grow and change, and they should inform each other. One book I found very useful in this is Creating Character Arcs by K.M. Weiland. She's author of 5 fiction books and numerous other nonfiction books for authors. I had never heard of actually positive, flat, or negative character arcs until she explained it, and of course that it made a lot of sense. I recognized them in the fictional landscape. Weiland also discussed the character's ghost, which is something in your character's past that haunts him. And this is very similar to the emotional wound idea. Either way, the emotional wound or the ghost will inform you on your character's arc. Will he change and overcome the trauma from his past, or will he allow it to haunt him into the future? You need to think about who you want your main character to be by the end of the story. It's okay if you don't know the whole story, but it definitely helps to know where you see your character ending up. Alright, so some say the character arc is not necessary to writing a good story. And while there are some excellent points in favor of no arcs, I feel having a character arc enriches the story. How I did it. To start, I developed my character on paper and later moved into Word documents and even a PowerPoint to show family trees. Note that I will talk about my mashup of ideas of Snow White and Rose Red, the fairy tale, with the Irish mythologies, but I will not give background details of these as I've covered them in previous episodes. If you're unfamiliar with either of these, I have some outside sources in the description box below, or you can watch this series from the beginning. So first I started with the basics, and the first one was names, and at first I hadn't decided if I would write Snow White or Rose Red as my main character, but I knew that I would choose new or alternate names. Also, the number 3 is a strong symbol in Irish mythology, so I wanted a third sister, and having 3 sisters worked great with the idea of writing a trilogy. I also liked the name Rose, the shortened version of Rose Red, and decided I would use flower names for the other 2 girls. And there's a very specific reason for me choosing flower names, which is tied to one of the Tuatha De Danann, but I don't want to give away that reason without spoiling a surprise in the books. At first, I did consider some alternate names for Snow White that meant white in Irish Gaelic, but I landed on Lily for the name and I decided on flower names. And then for the third sister, I wavered between Marigold, Buttercup, and Dandelion, as these are all flowers found in Ireland, and I eventually chose Marigold, which is probably the better option. So my research from the Snow White and Rose Red fairy tale story and the descriptions of the Tuatha De Danann influenced the girls' looks. The Irish deities were known for being tall with light-colored eyes and blonde or red hair. Snow White was already fair-haired in the story, although Rose Red was dark-haired. So my Snow White turned Lily became blonde and Rose became a redhead. I did make both of them tall with light-colored eyes, and their clothing is influenced by the tales in the Irish mythologies, as well as what historians can piece together from the history of that time period. And then I moved on to personality traits. Research also influenced the girls' personality traits, as Snow White was quiet and shy, and Rose Red was outspoken, lively, and cheerful. And at this point, I didn't have a clear sense of the third sister, Marigold, so I knew she wouldn't be my main character for the first book. I set her aside for the rest of this planning, except I still considered possibly having her dead at the start of the series. Next, I reviewed what I'd researched about the Tuatha De Danann, and all of them had magical abilities, which fit in with my what-if question about the girls possibly having magic to talk to animals because they talked to the bear in this fairy tale story. And I wasn't sure at this point if my sisters would be supernatural or just descended from the Tuatha De Danann, and I even considered possibly making them druids. Last, I assigned them personality types from Riso and Hudson's book, and this gave me a good idea of where to start with my characters. However, as I mentioned before in other episodes, I see the writing process as fluid, and I allow these initial notes to change as needed. Even though I'm like a planner in many ways, I lean most toward being a planter in that I like my characters to tell me who they are, and I let them change my mind. And just as the situation calls for it. So my original notes on their personality traits changed quite a bit as I wrote their stories. By the end of developing the basics, though, I did decide on Lily as my main character, and that has to do with motivation, which I will talk about in just a moment here. For relationships, which is next, I decided that my sisters would have each other and their mother as they did in the fairy tale, and they belonged to a clan of extended relations. I created PowerPoint slides to show the relationships between each settlement as well as family trees because it became quite extensive. And then I moved on to motivation. So an idea had started forming at this point. If Marigold was dead at the start of the story, and I combined that with Lily being quiet and shy, as in the fairy tale, perhaps Marigold's death triggered Lily's behavior, and that thinking led me to knowing Lily's emotional wound, that she was unable to save Marigold's life, or that she failed. And this is the lie she would tell herself, that she was responsible for her sister's accidental drowning, which would provide her with the motivation to seek safety and security for herself and her loved ones. And of course, all of this influenced her character arc. I actually stepped up Lily's reactions to Marigold's death so that at the start of the story, she would be voluntarily mute. And then when she becomes separated from Rose later, she would have a singular drive to save her sister. And this is the struggle for her story, in which she would hopefully grow as a character when her sister is kidnapped by the leprechaun. And so I had a goal at where I wanted her to end up by the end of the story. All right, so as I promised, some alternate methods. Here are some ideas for those who are not planners when it comes to writing everything out in your character development. I mentioned that I use PowerPoint for my clan alignments and family trees, which acts as a visual method, and you could do the same thing. You could add character traits, motivations, habits, etc. But maybe this is still too many words for you, so another idea is you could also interview your character. You tape record yourself asking questions and then answer them as if you're the character, and that could be a lot of fun. Another idea is to have your character write journal entries and get to know them that way. I also know many writers who prefer to have a visual of their character to decide who they are. Even planners do this. So you could do this as well. And if you have the skills, you could probably draw your characters. If not, you could do a search online, like through Google, although it could be a bit awkward to search for a 16-year-old blonde girl. Other options to this include going to websites with great images. One, Backstage is a compilation of actors' headshots. DeviantArt is another great website where people upload all kinds of artwork. And then there are sites that offer some royalty-free, totally free images like Pixabay, FreePic, and Pexels. If you want to use some of these images for commercial purposes, make sure to check the copyright licenses. I have all the links to these websites in the description box below. You could also go old school and look in magazines for model images. Another option is to use characters from a video game, like those that have a hero creator. And there's even one website called Character Creator that lets you make a character, and I put that link below as well. So just a note that although you have a picture of your character, it's not enough if you want to develop the character fully. So when you have your picture, visualize who your characters are, put them into scenes in your head, and throw something at them. See how they react. Get to know your characters. Then I would suggest you add a little more to your visual characters. Although there's many ways to do this, I do have 2 ways that I can suggest. One, you can make a character vision board. So a vision board is usually a visualization tool, which refers to a board of any sort, used to build like a collage of words and pictures that represent your goals and dreams. But in this case, the goals and dreams of your character. You can add character traits and fun colors and fonts. You could have a lot of fun with this. The second way is to talk it out with someone or your showerhead. Me? I talk to my car radio. Either way, openly talking about your character and hearing those words flow out as you describe your character will make your character start to feel like a real person to you. So those are my ways to start developing your main character. So you figure out the basics like names, physical traits, and personality traits. Decide on your character's emotional wound, which will provide them with the motivation to move through your story. And then sketch out a brief character arc. Where will your character be by the end of your story? I hope you guys liked this episode on developing your main character. To be totally honest, there's so much more you could do, but this information can help you get started, at least for now. In 2 weeks, I will continue this series with developing your story idea into a whole book. But next week, I will be posting a video 4 days in a row starting on Monday. The first 3 videos will be short videos, explaining the terms planners, pantsers, and plantsers, and how to decide which one you are. The 4th and last video will be a very special video because it will start with looking at 3 ways to design your book cover along with the real costs. And it will culminate with the cover reveal of my debut novel, Blood of the Lily. And I'm so excited to share my cover with you guys. I look forward to hearing whatever comments you may have. I'd love to know your thoughts and comments on what you found helpful in this episode or what you would like to know more about. So let me know in the comment section below. If you're new here, welcome. Please consider subscribing. Either way, please hit that thumbs up button. YouTube likes it and so do I. Now what you've been waiting for, this episode's pit stop. In this episode's pit stop, you will start with brainstorming the basics for your main character, comprising of the main character's possible names, physical traits, and personality traits. Then you'll move into relationships, motivation, and last, character arcs. And this pit stop also includes the names for the books and authors mentioned in the accompanying YouTube episode. If you fill out the pit stop worksheet, I would love to hear about your successes. If you have any questions about anything I covered today or the pit stop, please leave those in the comments below, or you can contact me through my website. If you want to stay up to date with everything I'm doing, please subscribe to my newsletter. Newsletter subscribers receive access to the first chapter of my debut novel, Blood of the Lily, along with other exclusives and giveaways. Thanks for watching this 5th episode in this series on how to write a fiction book. Again, if you like what you saw, give this video a thumbs up. And that's it. Thank you for hanging out with me today through this episode, and happy writing.